but I want to talk about how much of your self worth is tied into the work that you do. So, a lot of people with high functioning anxiety, especially, struggle with putting so much pressure on themselves and focusing so much on productivity, achievement, busyness, perfection, and more, which can result in your self worth then being attached to your career. And, whether things are going well, whether you are making enough money, what type of title you have, and all of that. So, I want to talk all about that and more in today's episode. My name is Tati, and this is Calmly Coping. And in today's episode, I'm going to talk about how to separate your worth from your work. And this is episode number 106. So, first, I want to talk about signs that your worth is tied to your work. So, what does this look like for people? What might this look like for you? This could be things like your mood, your confidence, and your self esteem might be dependent upon how you're doing, how much you're doing, how busy you're being, how much you're accomplishing, or whether it's a title that you have or a status that you have. And this can be particularly challenging for people who are in the beginning of their careers because there can be a lot of self doubt and imposter syndrome. So, if your worth is attached to the type of work you're doing, then you're automatically going to feel less confident in these periods of time, as well as somebody who's maybe in a career switch or pivot, or for those who are self employed. And this could be because, particularly with being self employed, there are the ups and downs that naturally occur, especially in the beginning periods of going into that and being an entrepreneur. So, the up and down of that yo yo of things going well, then things going not so well is inevitable. This is actually an inevitable part of life. So, when you are so focused and attached to what is happening externally, then your mood and how you're feeling then becomes dependent on these external things. So if you get a promotion, for example, you might be feeling really good and doing really well, or if you get a new client, or if you do well on a project, then you're going to be feeling good. However, if you're not doing well, maybe you experience a failure, maybe you get fired, maybe you retire, or you switch jobs or anything like that, then you may not be doing so well and you might feel lost and like, who am I, or what's my purpose, or have all of these doubts and potentially have decreased self worth as a result. And that feeling of self worth is essentially how valuable you feel as a person. And it can be tied to things like confidence and self esteem. It's more coming from a place of, how do you feel about yourself? How confident do you feel about yourself? And there can also be many guilty or negative feelings that can come up when you're not working. And this especially occurs with high functioning anxiety because a lot of times you might feel like you always need to be busy, you always need to be doing more. And so when you're not doing that, then you might feel guilty. You might have thoughts of, I'm not doing enough. And this can also play into that belief that your worth is tied to your work. So, what are the signs that this might look like? It might be pressure to always work or always be busy. You might always be thinking about work and have difficulty disconnecting. You might feel lost without work and feel like, well, who am I? What is my identity? Because so many times people ask you, tell me about yourself. And the first place that many people go is to talk about what they do for work. And that's the next topic that I'm going to talk about is separating your personal from your professional identity. It can be so common, especially when you're a high achiever, to be focused on what it is that you do for work as your identity. And this becomes a big part of who you are. And so it becomes difficult to then see, who am I outside of work? And then when this is happening, that's when you're in that yo yo of feeling like you're dependent upon what's happening. So many people define themselves by what they do. And I kind of want you to reflect upon and bring curiosity to how much of your identity is tied to your job. So, How often do you think about yourself and really focus on your job? And how much do you see that as a part of who you are? This isn't to say that it's wrong or it's bad to feel as though your job or your career is a big part of your identity. Absolutely not. I mean, I feel like that's the case for me, where this has become a big part of my identity. However, when it is the only thing that you view as your identity and it's hard to see yourself outside of work and it's hard to get any or derive any worth or purpose from the things that you do outside of work, then that's when your worth is really dependent upon how you're doing at work. And you're going to be stuck in a place of feeling like you're tied to this, and it's going to be challenging for you. So that's one of the first places that I think will help to look is the difference between your personal and professional identity. And this can be something that you can journal on or look at and think of, just what is that difference for you when you think of your professional identity, and what does it look like when you think of your personal identity? And this can include things like your relationships, if you have any hobbies, your interests, your personality, anything else like that. So now I want to get into tips that are going to help you to separate your worth from your work. So I have 5 tips that are going to help you to separate your worth from your work. So tip number 1, I kind of just talked about this, but it's to identify your identity outside of work. So what does that look like? And I know this is kind of a huge, grandiose question of like, who are you? And you don't necessarily need to define who you are, but just what is it that you enjoy doing outside of work? How do you view yourself outside of work? How do others view you? So what kind of interests do you have? What kind of hobbies? What are your strengths and positive relationships that you have? So this kind of ties into having some work-life balance, where it's not just the balance of time and setting boundaries, but it's the balance of just how you view yourself. And if we're too much on one end of the scale, then it's just inevitable that you're going to get into a place of being driven by this roller coaster of ups and downs that's going to happen with your career. And so when you have a balance, you're not relying and kind of putting all of your eggs in one basket and saying, what happens in work is going to be what determines how I feel about myself and how my mood is and how I go about my day to day. But you're kind of evening out and leveling the playing field so that you have these different areas to focus on and draw from. So this can be something that you can do as like a journaling exercise. This can be something that you might just bring awareness to when you are not at work. What's going on? What are you thinking about? How are you feeling? And just bringing curiosity to what does that look like for you, that identity outside of your job, outside of your career. So my second tip is to challenge the need to constantly do. So like I mentioned before, with high functioning anxiety, it is so common to be in a place of achievement, busyness, success, going for wanting more and achieving more. So I want you to ask yourself, do these things, these achievements, this success, this productivity, does this really define your worth? And a lot of times there can be unconscious limiting beliefs that make us think so. And actually, I'm going to be talking all about this topic specifically, these unconscious limiting beliefs, in next week's podcast episode. So subscribe if you want to be notified when that episode comes out. But, do these things of constantly staying busy and getting another title or achieving something more or getting more clients or making more money, does this really determine how good you are as a person, how worthy you are as a person? And I think a lot of times we can go to the place of just automatically believing that these things do make us feel better and do make us better people, quote unquote. But I think a lot of times this can be socially dictated, and it's something that occurs as a result of society, and that you want to appear like you're keeping up with the Joneses, for example, or, having more or having more success or whatever that looks like. And sometimes when we can just go one level down and start to question these beliefs, It doesn't mean that those things are bad. Again, it doesn't mean that you're not allowed to want to have the title, the accomplishment, the wealth. It just means that you're reflecting upon what is driving that. Do those things mean that you're a better person or that you're a more worthy person? And the answer is absolutely not. And it's kind of just looking at who you are outside of these things, outside of these titles and the way that other people view you and these material things, and getting to a place where you can feel worthy exactly as you are, because you're all worthy exactly as you are. And so when we can start to let go of, I need to be productive so that I don't look lazy, or I need to always be achieving more, and all of those things and the pressure you might put on yourself. Again, it's not bad to have these expectations for yourself, but it's when it's coming from a place of, I need to do this, and it's a place of fear and not feeling worthy, that then you just constantly get in this cycle where it never feels like it's enough. So looking at those beliefs of, I always need to be busy, I always need to be achieving more, that you might not even be consciously thinking, but might be under the surface, that might be driving those behaviors. And when you can start and like break them apart a little, then you can recognize that how that's kind of connected to your worth, and how that can prevent you from moving forward to a place where you feel worthy enough from within. So number 3 is to reflect on how others view you. And this, I would suggest specifically your close relationships. So I would guess that the people closest to you, whether it is friends, family, whomever, they don't view you purely by your career and by your job. They're not looking at you and saying like, oh, this is Jane, the manager of this profession, whatever. Of course they may view you in that way, but they view you as more than just your career and what you're doing. And I'm pretty sure they view you as the person that you are. And sometimes it can just help to take a step back and put yourself in the perspective of somebody else, that might be somebody close to you, or you can even have a conversation with them and ask you like, what is it that you see when you look at me? What is it that you think my strengths are? How do you see me as a person? And this might be an uncomfortable question for some people to ask. It's really up to you. And if you feel comfortable talking about this with somebody that's close to you, but sometimes just doing this thought exercise can help to put that in perspective of, people that are close to you especially are going to view you as more than your career. They're going to view you as more than your work. And so how can you try and do that thought exercise yourself and try and view yourself in that way? Are you a great friend? Are you very loyal? Are you a funny person? Are you somebody who is very trustworthy? I could go on, but there's all of these qualities that make you so much more than your career and what you're doing. And when we can kind of broaden the lens and look at the whole picture, then that can help to kind of give you another layer of separating your worth from your work in that way. So tip number 4 is to create boundaries between your work and personal life. So this can include different things. So this can include time boundaries. So saying that once you finish work for the day, then you're not going to check your email unless you really have to, or you're going to avoid thinking about work. Of course, we can't always control our thoughts, but getting into the rabbit hole of always worrying about and obsessing about work. Because the more that you create these boundaries, then the more that you're creating that distance and separation from yourself, so that your entire life isn't revolving around work and what you do and your career. This can also include physical boundaries. So I got a question on Instagram in regards to that, and he said that he's working from home and having his office close to his bedroom. And so how can you separate your worth from your work in that regard? And so I think that is happening especially more nowadays, after COVID and everything, now that more people are working from home. And that can be challenging to have that separation of, waking up in the morning and walking over to another room and not having that physical separation. So I suggest in that case doing whatever you can to try and create those boundaries, depending on your circumstances. So if it's possible to have a space solely dedicated for work, and that's your space when you go in there, and trying to avoid doing work all throughout the house. Of course, I know that sometimes I even do this. It can feel constraining to be in the same place all the time. But sometimes even just having those physical boundaries can really help, because just psychologically it puts you in a different mindset. If I'm going into this room to do work, and once I leave this room then work is done, that can be a great way of setting those boundaries and creating more of a separation between work and your personal life. So another thing can be when it comes to digital boundaries or communication. So things like taking the email app off of your phone, or not responding to emails in the middle of the night, or things like that. Small shifts like that can help you to create that separation and create that boundary, so then your work is not permeating your entire life, and so that you can focus on the present of what's actually going on outside of work. So maybe that is just spending time for yourself, doing things that you enjoy. Maybe it's spending time with loved ones. But the more that you can create those distinctions, and I know that it's not always going to be 100% clear, it's really being flexible with what works best for you. But the more you're going to be able to have that separation between your self-worth and your work. And tip number 5 is to celebrate yourself separately from work. So this kind of wraps together everything that I've been talking about, but I want you to celebrate your strengths, your hobby, your time separate from work, and make it a point to really be kind to yourself and to really be compassionate to yourself. And so one exercise that I've been doing recently is to, at the end of the day, write down my wins or my gratitude. And so this can be an exercise that you can do with work and then also outside of work. So you can reflect on what went well today that had nothing to do with work. And sometimes just doing like a once daily exercise like this, 5 minutes at the end of the day, can be a great way to look back on things with this different perspective, because a lot of times it's easy to focus on the negative and focus on, I didn't have enough time for this or that. But when you can just kind of switch that perspective and try and look at it through the lens of, well, what went well, or what do I enjoy about the time that I spend for myself outside of work, with my family, with my friends, whatever, then that can be a great daily exercise that can help to build that muscle of seeing yourself and seeing those strengths that you have outside of your career. So this is a big topic that I could talk about for a while. Those are all the thoughts that I have on it right now. If you have any questions at all, then you can leave a comment in the YouTube. I'll be around to answer some live questions. And I'm also going to be hosting a live workshop today at 6 p.m. Eastern time on being a highly sensitive person with high functioning anxiety. I know it's a mouthful, but if you're interested in learning more about that, I left a link for that in the description. It's for members of the Calm and Ambitious community, and so you can join us there. There's also going to be a replay, so if you're not catching this live, you can still absolutely access it. And I'm curious if you like me going live like this. If you'd like to see me go live again, then definitely like this video and I will do more. It's something I'm kind of experimenting with. But we can also continue the conversation in my Facebook group, Calmly Coping. And I'd love to hear your questions on what you think. Is your self-worth tied to your work? What can you do to start changing that? So you can go to calmlycoping.com/group to join the conversation. There's going to be a post on that Wednesday, the 22nd, so you can let us know what you think. So again, that topic of separating your self-worth from your work is something that's a big topic. And so it's something that, like with anything else, you can see changes when you start to make these small steps over time. And so You can go back over this episode, listen to the tips that I talked about, take notes on them, see what resonates with you, and see if there's even just one thing that you can start changing in your day to day so that you can start to build your self worth from within so that you're not in this roller coaster of ups and downs of feeling in these low places of self doubt when things aren't going well and blaming yourself and feeling like there's something wrong with you. And then when things are going really well, it's like this high of like, wow, everything's so great. I'm so awesome. Because that's what happens when your self worth is really tied to your work. So when you can start to work on your self-worth from within and separate how things are going at work, separate your career, your title, your income, all of that from who you are as a person, then you're going to be more resilient. You're going to be able to cope with the stress that comes up. You're going to be able to manage the struggles and the failures that are inevitable as part of your day-to-day and as part of your job. So I hope that you found this episode helpful. Thank you so much for joining me. And that's it for today. So until next time, be calm.